Welcome to Beyond the Razor Wire Fence. I'm Kelly Sheard, the director of the Gender Wealth Institute within Women's Way. Our mission is to advance gender and racial equity by building collective power to disrupt systems of oppression and strengthen alternative models centered in inclusion, love, and liberation. Over the last 7 months, Women's Way facilitated a narrative change fellowship with 7 women and gender-expansive individuals with experiences of incarceration and reentry. With help from Love Now Media, our fellows honed their storytelling skill set to advocate for economic equity in Philadelphia. This podcast centers their stories. Beyond the Razor Wire Fence asserts that incarceration is a form of wealth extraction. Moreover, through this podcast, fellows depict the disproportionately deep impact for women, trans, and gender-expansive people. The fellows' stories dive deep into how the carceral system perpetuates the gender wealth gap and calls attention to the institutionalized strategies of extraction before, during, and after incarceration. Through a combination of interviews, storytelling, and research, the fellows challenge assumptions around incarceration and advocate for a shift in policy and culture to move us closer to a liberatory economy.
This episode features Safo Fulton. We'll hear their story and listen to her in conversation with our friends from Love Now Media. Welcome, Safo.
This episode contains mention of drug use, substance abuse disorder, and child neglect.
Hi, my name is Safo Fulton, CEO and Director of Women Beyond Borders, women spelled with an X. I want to talk about my story and how the gender wealth gap impacts my life. I'm a person that has survived complex trauma. For me, is at birth, born in a biracial family in the 60s. I was left in the closet for dead. I survived. I have been impacted by multiple traumatic events in a lifetime, being left by my biological mother, being raised by another. I want to kind of jump forward from there into how complex trauma has impacted my life. At 8 years old, I started getting locked up. I was arrested first in Corvettes for shoplifting at 8. From 8 years old, throughout my juvenile lifetime, I've been impacted with the criminal justice system multiple times in the juvenile offenses. At 21, and also using substances. The substance abuse progressed by age 21, and I started using a substance known as crack cocaine. Crack cocaine took me to another level of mental health disparities, life disparities, economic disparities, just even existence disparities. I started getting locked up and doing time at 21. That was something that I never understood, couldn't understand, but also couldn't get out of. It almost felt like with the addiction and the level of mental health impact, self-induced mental health impact, substance abuse usage, it almost felt like I was drowning. I felt like I couldn't come up out of a pool and I kept trying to save my life. I kept trying to stop because that's what family members say. That's what folks say. Just stop. Just stop. You know, there was some other things that were going on that I couldn't tap into at the time. My substance abuse usage took off for continued for 32 years of my life. At 42, I stopped. It's a long time. It's 32 years. At 42, I returned to school. I lost my son. I have 2 surviving daughters. I have 5 beautiful grandchildren. At 42, I went back to school. I now today will be 60 in 2 weeks. I've obtained 9 letters behind my name, associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, 2 master's degree. I work internationally. I'm an international psychology student. I have 1 class left to finish my PhD. I dropped out of school in the 8th grade as a direct result of my lifestyle. But I want to talk about something more daunting, something more like impactful that has really transitioned my life to even come on this platform. I want to talk about collateral consequences. I want to talk about a little bit about how even after doing everything that I could do to make a difference in my lifetime, with all these degrees, with all this experience, with all this lived experience, with being an expert, a global expert, I work internationally. there's still barriers to me moving forward. Like the barriers are, like I couldn't get a license with my MSW, a license as a private practitioner. I have a private practice. I've been successful. I work with trans folks that were justice impacted, and I work with LGBTQ folks that have been impacted by domestic violence. Couldn't get a licensure. So that means that, they have to pay cash pay. So when you're talking about dealing with marginalized communities, they don't always have money to pay cash pay. So I want to move into how this gender wealth gap really, hurts me. As a PhD candidate and as a person that is internationally invested, I want to say that, the deliberate attempt with systems of injustice have gotten to a place where, like, my convictions have paused me from getting my licensure. My conviction stops me from getting that 6 figures a year. Not my credentials, not my expertise, not my experience, but my convictions. I am not my number. My call to action for this talk is to talk about, the amendment to the Clean Slate. We have billions of dollars for expungement. We have billions of dollars for Clean Slate. Clean Slate only covers cleaning and expunging your record after 10 years for a felony, but those felonies don't include me. I got a trafficking charge for 2 bags of crack. Drug trafficking with possession with intent to deliver. So, when we talk about deliberate and systemic injustice, we need to look at the fine-tuning and amend the fine-tuning with it. That's my call to action. Thank you.
A note of context from Women's Way. Sappho mentions collateral consequences of incarceration, or the financial and professional consequences that incarceration has on an individual's quality of life. She names them as discriminatory against people of color, LGBTQ+ people, and low-income people. Let's talk about second chance hiring and Clean Slate, the existing practices and policies to address this gap, but are far from sufficient. Second chance hiring is the practice of intentionally hiring individuals with a record, a call to action to employers to correct the discriminatory employment gap that forces people in reentry into minimum and sub-minimum wage jobs with no pathway to advance. According to the Clean Slate Initiative, some $87 billion is lost every year in GDP due to the and underemployment of people with a criminal record. JP Morgan, which Sappho mentions in a little bit, is leading an effort to strengthen second chance hiring policy in banking. Clean Slate refers to state legislation that automatically seals records for people who meet certain requirements. This means that when a potential employer, landlord, or loaning institution conducts a background check, their convictions will not show up. Pennsylvania was the first state to pass the Clean Slate Act in 2018, but its requirements are extremely rigid. For instance, only those with nonviolent first offenses are eligible for automatic record sealing 1 year after their release, and those with certain types of felonies are eligible after 10 years. PA recently expanded the eligibility requirements in 2023, shortening wait times for felonies and allowing more felonies, including drug felonies, with a minimum sentence of 29 months or less. Sappho mentions that despite the expansion, they're still not eligible for sealing. Additionally, eligible individuals are unable to get their records sealed until they pay their restitution, or the sum of money the court determines that they owe to the victim. As we've heard from Jamila, restitution is extremely difficult to pay, especially for those who are already experiencing poverty, those who are caretakers when they return. When we think about who was targeted by discriminatory war on drug era policies at the intersection of increasing numbers of incarcerated women, it seems that the communities most targeted by mass incarceration are least likely to benefit from this type of legislation. Check the show notes for links for more information and for resources. Let's get back to the show.
Hi, I'm Nicole Blackson with Love Now Media, and today I'll be speaking with fellow Sappho Fulton. So thank you so much for joining me today, Sappho. I've heard a lot about your story, and I think one of the things, while I've learned so much, I want to know, what have you learned about yourself during this fellowship?
The sides of my truth, even talking with my introduction, like the sides of the parts of me that were before age 42, I've stuffed. Mm-hmm. I've stuffed in a way that I almost wanted to believe that they never happened. You know, I didn't want people to know how much trauma I had been and experienced. You know, I thought that if I acted as if, and if I showed up, and if I did the things that society say is normal, that people would kind of see and appreciate my successes. And they wouldn't ask me, like, what happened to you? You know, coming into this fellowship, like, it was like, I want to build the bridge. Because I no longer want to show up and act as if.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a whole person.
Yes.
And my story matters. And I know it can matter to someone else's life.
Yeah. What are some of the areas that you would like to see the impact of people who have experienced things like you in the design of like the carceral system?
I needed help early on. I needed mental health help. I never wanted to take medication. Medication has been stigmatized in the Black community. I've had adult ADHD. You know, I'm super smart, and there's so many things that I can do, but there's so many things that I needed. I was homeless for years, and I was so high I didn't even realize I was homeless, like, you know, literally. So, because I had become comfortable in that culture. And I had become comfortable with getting tired, like so many people we see today in degradation. You know, they're like, why don't you just go to a shelter? Because it's safe there on the street. It's safe in that community. You understand? You know what to expect. You know, they're kind of unwritten rules. I needed help early on.
Yeah. What was that moment when you realized, like, wow, like, I'm a child? Because you said from the age of, I think, 8. When did you realize I need some help? I'm different from maybe somebody else in my class. I need something more.
I don't think I saw it. Because I remember I was a bully. I was angry. I didn't find a place of belonging. You know, I came up in a house of hustlers. I didn't have a whole lot of choices because I was the kid that always wanted to be like my dad. You know, my dad had a speakeasy, he had women, he had a job, you know, and they always looked at the fact that he was always sharp. And I wanted to be just like my dad. And I remember when my dad was on his deathbed, you know, and my dad was a really good provider. You know, my dad was on his deathbed and he looked up at me, and I was about 8 years old, and he looked up at me and he said, you know, you're the man of the house now. You gotta take care of things. And I have this pillow that says, you know, saying the man with the master plan, never work, never will. So I kind of like had those ideologies and those misconstrued thought processes early on. And when I say misconstrued, because I've had another side of life.
Yeah.
Because I thought that was it.
So after going through the carceral system, but then going in there with an 8th grade education, you said, right?
Tested in at Muncie at a 2nd grade reading level.
2nd grade reading level.
2nd grade
now
reading
to being a
level.
doctoral candidate. Yeah. It's something.
Yeah. Something bigger than me.
Yeah. Something bigger than you. So when you talk about not being able to get your licensure because of your conviction, what is that something?
It just feels like, as a woman of color, a lesbian woman of color, it just feels like it's just never enough. Systemically, it's like it's never enough. No matter how hard I work, no matter what I do, it's just like it's never enough. You know, it's no matter what you do. But then again, you know, like I beg to differ on a lot of days. Like I'm crying, like I'm feeling it. You know, you always make me vulnerable, Nick. Like you always pull that thing out of me. But like the reality of it is like I'm so optimistic and I'm so self-determined because I know where I come from.
Right.
It's always, it's
And
more
you're
than
doing
enough. Like I wake up in the morning and I tell myself, like, you know, I remind myself to tell myself, like, you're more than enough. You got this.
Yeah.
Push through. Even if your voice shakes, raise it. You know, raise it.
Absolutely. And I'm grateful for your example. I mean, to go through all the twists and turns, right? And to your point, you had to just make a decision to stop. But you also had to make a decision to start. To start doing the things, to educate yourself, to start helping people. What clicked for you to say, I want to help these group of people?
It was a call to action. It was a call to action. I was terrified to come outside of my box. And when I say box, I was in a solace. I was in a space where I had the blinders on when I came home from jail. I couldn't be with my old friends. I couldn't be with the persons that I was incarcerated with. I couldn't be around it because I was attached to the lifestyle. It wasn't that I thought I was better. I had to believe I was better, and I had to walk in different spaces, but it was a call to action because it was like I was in Africa. I went to Africa for like 7 months. I got a program in Africa, and I was living in Africa, and I was doing shadow work. And it was like Spirit spoke to me, and it was so loud and clear. And it was like, it is an absolute call to action. I remember when I got initiated to Ifa. I'm an Ifa priestess. I practice African spirituality. I practice Yoruba. And when I got initiated, it dropped down on my calling, on my life path. It's like, you got something to do. Mm-hmm. This second chance was not about you.
Yeah.
It's like, you got something to do. And I was like, I don't want to do it.
Right. Sometimes we resist so much.
It's like, I don't want to do it. So I've been in Africa. I just came back in November, and I haven't stopped since I came back because it was no doubt. It was no saying no. My life wasn't about me.
Yeah. You mentioned something, second chance. Could you speak a little bit about second chance employers and what you have experienced?
All right. Now
them?
I'm going to stop crying because now I'm going to get angry a little bit because when we talk
That's all right.
I told you I'm an expert in systems. I study systems as a PhD student. So when we talk about systemic injustice, I want to talk about how policy, second chance hires had this policy that they say that they hire second chance employees. So when you come home from incarceration, I'll give you how this kind of works. Like, so I'm a systems expert, but so when you come home from incarceration, they give you this sheet and they say, these are places that you can get a job. They're all minimum wage paid jobs, So if you don't go there, then you don't really want a job. Is the thought process of the parole officer or the judge? If you don't go to McDonald's, or like if you don't go to these minimum wage paying positions, then you don't really want to make a difference in your life and work. So somebody that comes home with some skill sets that is qualified to go into a job that is paying a livable wage, like saying maybe making more. I'm just at a bare minimum, maybe 60,000, 50, 60,000 with a skill set, welding,
right?
Industrial cleaning, maybe marketing, maybe banking, maybe executive director. In these six-figure positions, 60,000 plus. I'm just saying 60 at a low minimum. Their jobs don't qualify. They pay you 60,000 if you're formerly incarcerated. They'll start you at 90,000 with a bachelor's if you have the skill sets and you got a good resume. So when you look at the policy, you have to look at the policy line because the policy line states second chance hire, but at a 2%. So it's like something I learned from my good comrade, Diane. I'm not going to say her last name. I'll let her tell her own business. But she talked about on one of her talks where these foundations only give out, they have this 5% fund where they have to give back this money, but they make interest on the endowment. That's the same thing with second chance hires. Like they make interest on, they have some kind of compensation. I haven't quite figured it out yet because once I do, I want to kind of create something else. But they have some kind of compensation for saying like I'm a second chance hire. It's almost like a affirmative action.
Right.
But they don't.
Yeah.
JP Morgan is going up against it now because he's talking about like, why can't I bring some folks in to do banking and do administrative work if I move this policy line? So they're trying to figure out how to systemically move this policy line because it is a barrier.
Yeah.
Not to mention being a black woman, being a black woman, being formerly incarcerated, being of a different kind of culture, being of a diverse background, because you're talking about justice and practice. So you're coming from a whole nother culture anyway.
Right.
We speak different, we act different, we speak with our hands. We're more aggressive. We're almost intimidating. You understand?
I wanted to talk about that because as you're speaking, I'm thinking of the intersectionality, right? In regards to race, gender, but I'm also thinking about it in regards to socioeconomic status, but also when you get into the workplace, like what is the level of empathy that you need to feel like if you're a second chance employer, you should be looking at these things. Consider me for this, but also make sure that you are providing empathy in this way. What would be some of those things that you would say second chance employers should really be looking at to provide empathy?
Increase professional development, but increase the professional development in a way that fits the room. Like you know, how do you say, check the temperature in the room.
Right.
You know
your audience.
And check my audience. You know, I supervise men. I have 2 teams of men right now. I have a team of men that are credible messengers. They work with at-risk youth. I have a team of men that work with inside the jail with formerly incarcerated people. And I have some of the men that say to me, you ain't no real man. I wish you stopped talking to me like that. You know, and I'm like, what am I doing?
So then we get into gender expression. This will be like my final question. How does gender expression impact your professionalism experience?
It really does as an aggressive presenting woman. You know, the women look at you funny when you walk in the bathroom at work. You know, it's not just our trans siblings. It's not just our gender non-conforming folks that are misgendered. It's like the aggressive presenting women as well. You don't have work booze or you get a sexual harassment charge.
So checking in with that double standard, not just for those who are just as impacted, but also in regards to gender expression and sexuality as well, is what I'm hearing. All right.
Those intersectionalities definitely do impact you. When we talk about the gender wealth gap, that thing matters. Even with men that are directors.
Absolutely.
It's always a pushback. It's always a pushback on mannerism. It's always a pushback on culture differences. It's always like, you are not enough. So
and
we create our own
saying
spaces.
You are not enough, what do you affirm and tell yourself every day?
I'm more than enough.
More than enough. Thank you so much, Sappho, for joining us.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Behind the Razor Wire Fence. This podcast is brought to you in collaboration with Women's Way, Change the Narrative Fellows, Love Now Media, and Little Drummer Boy Recordings.